I've had a few questions from you about your proposals, so I thought I'd just include a very brief check-in about some of the things you can think of as you're working on your proposals for this upcoming Friday. So keep in mind that at this stage, I really am looking for a proposal. What does that mean? That means I need about 1 page of content that has been typed. And in that, I'm looking for a few different things. I'm looking for a brief overview of what you're planning to do, whether it's a community intervention or a follow-up study, what your topic is, and once again, a very brief introduction to what you plan to do for your project. So what your follow-up study might look like, or what your community intervention might look like, as just an initial, hey, here's what I'm planning. It doesn't have to be super fleshed out, but I do want a general idea of your plans, and be prepared to potentially have to make some changes or to clarify a little bit further as you go. But this is an initial attempt to just kind of put something down on paper so we can communicate about your ideas before you get too far in. And I can either say, hey, this looks great. I would recommend adding these things. Or, hey, you might want to redirect to something else. So once again, I want you to briefly describe your plans. This is intended to be a short and sweet document where you're just checking in with me about your project without necessarily going into a whole lot of detail. One of the most important things about this project is that it needs to be connected with the research, and I would like it to start being connected with the research right from the very beginning, which means that you need to start building some sources and having them there even as part of your proposal. So even though it's a very bare bones sort of sketch about what you have planned, I want you to show that you've started collecting some evidence in order to help back up what it is you're doing, what you expect will happen, and why. I want you to go ahead and cite that research in APA style whenever you mention it by using the author's last name and year. So we've gone through APA style last week, and I really want you to attempt to apply that in your proposal. When you mention a study, it should be cited in APA style. And you should put those sources to a few different purposes. So you want to use your sources to support your hypotheses if you're doing a follow-up study, or if it's a community intervention, what you're doing and why it will be effective. I want to make sure that your community intervention is empirically sound, that you're not just doing things because you think that they will work, but because you're basing it off of research that shows that it works. And I want you to have your sources listed in a references page. So ideally, you're looking for 4 sources, and I want you to have your sources started to be gathered together. If you don't have all 4 right away, that's okay, but I really do want you to aim for having at least a start to gathering some resources together for this proposal phase. And once again, I expect your references page to be a separate page in APA style that lists all your references by alphabetical order by first author's last name. See the How to Cite an APA style document for more information about how to format that. And I do include a video for how to access that information for your citation as well. Keep in mind, any start is better than no start. I want you to get some words down on paper that indicate what you're planning on doing for your project, just so we can touch base on it and make sure you're on the same page as I am. I'd rather have you write down something and have to change it than start from scratch and then end up in the wrong direction. Here's a few specific things to think of as you're doing a follow-up study that will help you better align with what I'm expecting. I might ask you to clarify how your study is different from previous research so that you're not just doing a replication, but you're doing an expansion. So for example, if you're expecting different results than previous research, you're on the right track. Or if you're applying a new procedure or combining 2 studies variables together, that's another good indication that your study is different or unique while expanding on and connected to that previous research. When you're talking about what you're doing for your follow-up study, I want to know what your different groups are and what they'll be doing during the study. You can summarize it very briefly. I'm not expecting a full procedure, but I should have a rough sketch about what you have planned for your study, not just what your ideas are, but what people are actually, what you're thinking they'll actually do during the study. I would also like you to start thinking about your current hypotheses. And keep in mind that I expect you to have evidence to support those hypotheses, and that evidence comes from that previous research. So for example, if you're exploring a given psychological study, but you're looking at it through a different culture. So you're saying, okay, I want to see if people from a more collectivistic culture would respond differently to this particular study than people from an individualistic culture. It's not enough just to say, I think there'll be cultural differences. You actually have to think through how they would differ and why, and come up with some good evidence that would suggest that that's what's going on. So it's not enough just to say, I want to see how this would be different with 60-year-olds. I actually want you to think through, is there a good reason that you'd expect 60-year-olds to be fundamentally different from the 18-year-olds that were initially studied? And how would they be different and why? And do you have research evidence to back that up? And if you don't, you might want to go in a different direction. This is just a little bit more information to think about if you're doing a community intervention. I want you to make sure to articulate why your issue is important. Keep in mind that we're trying to make the community a little bit of a better place. Why is this something that is a necessary fix? I also think it's important that you go ahead and clarify the characteristics of this phenomenon. What is going on? What are the impacts of it? And to really define it and have a good idea of what it is. Another thing that you could think of, for example, is who is more susceptible to this particular phenomenon and why, whether that's internet bullying or being swayed by fake news or engaging in vaping behavior or not properly social distancing or washing your hands or taking precautions. Who is not doing these behaviors? Who's more susceptible and why? And just thinking through a little bit more about how this phenomenon might work. Now keep in mind that for some of these phenomena, you might have to go outside of the field of psychology in order to explore who is more susceptible and why, and how this phenomenon works. But that psychology might have some information for you about it as well. You need to identify your target group and what they'll be doing during the intervention. Your target group should align with who's more susceptible, and what they'll be doing should be kind of aligned with how the phenomenon works, as well as what research shows might be effective at changing behavior. Keep in mind that there's all sorts of research you've read around persuasion that could help you as a starting place if you're a little stuck about what you might do. But also understanding why a particular group might respond to a certain phenomenon in different ways might give you a hook that you can use psychology in order to help address. But once again, I want your intervention to be based in evidence, so that you need some sort of connection to research rather than common sense in order to establish why your intervention is going to work. So think a little bit more about what that might look like, using once again some of the evidence from the section on social cognition or the section on persuasion, the section on dissonance reduction, whatever you might need to look at as a way to get you thinking about how you might persuade people to change and what that might look like.